Hello, friends.
Mike? Yep.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. I'm really grateful to have so many people, a lot of people, faces I don't know, faces I do know very well. Very grateful we can all gather together and have this opportunity to just see each other when we can. So thank you. Framework's mission, I'm sure many of you have heard me speak about this before, is to create these spaces where we can come together and just compare notes. Our mission is based on 3 principles. We want to educate our clients to understand the work we do better. We want to educate and mentor the next generation of professionals that are coming up behind us to understand best practices for the skills that are really hard to quantify, that aren't the technical skills, but the process skills that we, bleed on many, many show sites. And then that middle position is educating each other. We work across many different silos and environments to do very similar work, and I think the way we learn to do it in those different environments is important to share and create light bulb moments across practice for all of us. So please get to know your entertainment technology production neighbors and the types of work that they do, and share insights. This is where we advance the practice for everyone moving forward. So with that in mind, I just want to mention a few upcoming events that we have on the calendar. I know many of you will probably be at LDI. We are having a meetup the Monday night of LDI, and I invite everyone to look out for tickets for that event. We're hoping to put together a meetup in the middle of December in London, and we'll hopefully have some information coming up on that. And for those of you who attend ISE in Barcelona in February, plan to spend an extra day. We're going to have a meetup after the ISE event closes so that we can cross over into the Loom Barcelona Festival. So we hope to have a really exciting time. And I have some panel seats open, so talk to me after the show if you think you're going to be in Barcelona. I want to extend my thanks to Connor for suggesting this really fantastic evening. Abby, Tavia, and Ryan have been critical in making this event happen, as well as the rest of the Pixera team, and I'm just really grateful for their support and converting this space into a place we can share together and make it look so pro. So I thank you for that. I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Thank you. Just a couple quick remarks. We're so grateful to have you all here. This space is expressly for this purpose, to gather people in the industry, people that we love to spend time with. Massive thank you to Bateman, Tavia, Ryan, Abby, and the rest of the A.B. Stumpfel team. What we do is we make fancy software and computers, but why we do it is really to be here and to have friends and connections, the friendships and connections that we build here. So thanks so much. You're always welcome here. If you want to come tech a show, have a coffee, chill on the couch, attend a training, whatever it is, this is for you guys. That's why we're here, and we're so happy to have you here tonight. Thanks.
So we have 2 presentations tonight. We're going to have a panel session following our first presentation, which is coming from Jay and Sam. They're going to come out, introduce themselves, and talk about, I want to get this title right because it's pretty cool. Control and Color, How We Accidentally Became Software Developers. I think they're going to share some really good insights. Please hang out with us through the whole session. We will have a small transition from their presentation into the panel, and then we can hang around a little bit after for more drinks and chat. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jay.
I don't know if this is actually more terrifying or less to look out in this audience, and I know half the people, and more importantly, you knew where I came from, so I think that's gonna probably keep me honest. But if not, just shout out. Ooh.
And we're already running into technical issues.
So this is why we stay back a house a little bit. There we go. Clicker. They always used to show this Steve Jobs video about when the tech doesn't work and how important it is to kind of vamp. because, you know, you never want to throw the back of house under the bus. I've been thrown under the bus a lot of times. Always my fault. Always actually my fault. I never took the blame for it, of course, right? It was always somebody else's problem.
Is that the Logitech one? Does it have a dongle?
There's the dongle is out.
Is the screen in the way?
That switch on the phone?
Well, now I know that nobody's going to listen to anything we say because I can't even hit the on button. Fantastic. So this is control and color, how we accidentally became software developers. I'm going to do a quick introduction about the project and the business case for it. Spoiler alert, there's not really one. We're not very good business people, but we did it because we love it. My name is Jay Spriggs. I'm the managing partner of Astra Production Group.
And hi, Master Production Group.
So the idea behind this, so Sam and I met at Intrepid Studios in 2020 to make a pocket virtual production studio. Some of the people in the audience were there as well. I come from a live events background, touring, corporate, all that other stuff. Sam comes from a more traditional film background. And as we were starting to interface media servers into this kind of filmic background and starting to use Unreal more and more, the big constant complaint was that there was a lack of color tools that mimicked film workflows because the goals are different, right? If you're looking at color from a media server perspective, you are either trying to do a corrective workflow or you are trying to do some really wild stuff that in no way reflects anything in reality. So when Astra was founded in 2023, we're almost 2 years old in March, we decided to create a tool that would act as a calling card, right? A way to differentiate ourselves. We wanted to use industry standard color interfaces and workflows so that when people that were looking for creative management of the color workflows were behind the wheels, they could actually get a very pleasing result that was very, very transparent to the way they would work in a post workflow. We chose Pixera because as a platform, there was a really, really easy path to integration. And also we were journeying into a partnership with them and we wanted to deepen that overall relationship. The challenges. The people that know me know that I'm a systems engineer and sometimes I press the go button. We had no experience writing shaders. More importantly, we had no traditional programming background at all, right? It's very, very important to say this because when we undertook this, we had no idea what we were doing, but we decided to wade in as a way to learn the things that we didn't know. Some other challenges were the UI elements in Pixera control natively didn't include all of the necessary tools at the time. We also wanted to use the industry's knowledge. A lot of the best color people that we knew had full-time jobs at very, very important places. So if we wanted to access that knowledge, we definitely couldn't charge for it because that was all very industry-wide and kind of kept behind closed doors information. Another thing is there's no way to protect the shaders in Pixera, right? If you go and you click on our shaders, you right-click on them, you open up in any kind of text editor, you can see everything. You can see everything we did. You can copy, paste, adapt that however you want to do it. The other thing is we are a proudly boutique company. Boutique means small. And we are not set up for software sales and support. We do not have the people to manage calls to support this kind of thing. And honestly, spinning that kind of thing up was going to be a huge challenge that we would have to go in wholeheartedly into. And one of the biggest things is it's a small target audience, and they're going to need a lot of high-touch support because everyone has an opinion about how color should work, and it's very, very hard to find people outside of the very basic scientific method of it that agree about the actual endpoint. So the solutions. He couldn't be here today. The biggest solution we found, call Florian. He's a freelancer. That's his email. I would love to take a lot of credit for how smart we are. Sam deserves a lot of credit for developing the UI and the actual goals of the project. But in reality, Florian did most of the stuff. Yeah. So we decided to actually go and develop a custom UI because we started in Control to see if we could develop a native UI tool in the web environment, and it just wasn't reactive enough, right? It's very, very, very linear in how it works, and we needed to have a very, very specific way that it felt when you were using it. So we prototyped it at first in Touch Designer because it's Touch Designer, right? Great UI tools. And actually some of the videos you'll see at the first part of Sam's demonstration are going to be the Touch Designer version. And then after that, honestly, one of the biggest things was we didn't want to have people install Touch Designer every single time they wanted to run the tool, because at the end of the day, it should be a very small executable. So we pushed the development into Rust. One of the biggest things is that we spent a lot of time making sure that the feelings of the controls were right, because it's not linear on the wheels when you're pulling them, right? It feels more like log. And we did a good job, but I just had a conversation with somebody 2 days ago that gave us the scientific reason it should feel like log versus just kind of making it kind of feel right from experience. So we actually have to go back and redevelop that. And then also, we want to start developing it for use with tangent panels so that you have some kind of like physical interface for it. Ease of use. We use Pixara's API to control the keyframes, right? This shader is just an effect that lives in Pixara and has exposed keyframes. And so Pixara's API just essentially spits out a very easy way to control those keyframes. We were able to just use GLSL. It's awesome. You can also right-click on all of their effects and see exactly what they are. So we didn't have to learn any kind of bespoke, customized language. We can load the effects directly into the application folder. We don't have to package it with Pixara. There's no kind of security behind it. You just put it in the effects folder, and Pixara will automatically find that file. A big one, and I wish we could take credit for it because it's kind of slick, but Pixara essentially just spits out the information about if this effect lives on the timeline and the layer. So we were able to pick that up easily so that the UI, as you'll see, will actually just report what is the controllable module that we're using for each one of these. And we had a lot of support from the developers. A week after we pitched it, we were on a call with the developers in Austria, giving us a lot of tips about how to actually do this. And then on top of that, the community outreach. I mean, obviously Connor has this space now in the Pixara team. And it was really easy to find people to come together onto this because it was already used by a lot of people that wanted this tool. And one of the biggest things is that we were able to focus on the end outcome because we, again, had no reason to monetize this thing. So this is why we chose to go open source with it. We had the ability to use other people's work without the danger of monetizing. People were very willing to give us the information we needed to really streamline this effort because there was never going to be an endpoint of a product to sell that they would need to have some kind of cut or equity into. It did come up a couple of times. When you're developing something, you're always going to think about if you can sell it, right? We don't need to support it because we're not selling it. Any feature requests or any support requests, we can take on our own time and add into the software at our own pace. And that allows us to own the development and the actual endpoint. We could make a tool that we just wanted to use, and if anybody else wanted to use it, you can have fun. And that lets us keep it niche as well, because we don't have to cater to a wide audience. We can just have it work the way that we want it to. On top of that, we can choose the partners, because again, there's no money behind it. So anybody that wants to work on it really wants to work on it. And there's a lot of goodwill from the industry, I think. I mean, how many people use it here? Ish, kind of, yeah. We've had some good reviews from it. We're working on the shader to actually replicate this. So this is a question that came up over and over throughout the development, and I'll talk about the business case and what's resulted from it afterwards. But the big question that was always on our minds is, why do we have to monetize absolutely everything that we do? Why can't we just do this? Because we thought it needed to be done, and we had a good time doing it. So now, we're going to do the toolkit demo.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I apologize if some people here have already seen this because we've been trotting around for over a year, but I'm going to do it again. So what is it? It's like Jay said, so this is a set of shaders that live. And the initial concept was to do the most commonly used tools. So that was our LGG wheels and then custom curves, so curves like hue versus saturation. We thought those would be the most commonly used tools, and those were the ones that we would get asked for the most. And we wanted to build it in a way that felt familiar to people who were already familiar with grading in like Resolve or LiveGrade or something like that. So we sort of ripped them off, but they're
recording that. Don't say that.
Let's call it inspired.
It's on a live stream.
Okay, so just want to talk about why color correction is necessary, either on a tour or a film or TV show. So there are two parts of this. I think there's the technical correction side and then the non-technical creative side. So for technical corrections, you're going to get notes all the time like, hey, can you gamma down like 20%? If you don't have a gamma control, brightness down, maybe a little bit of contrast, I don't know. That's close enough maybe. But now we have a way to actually properly take in notes for specific adjustments that your client would want. And that would include things like color temperature and tint, et cetera. And then the most fun one, honestly, has been the non-technical corrections. So at the end of the day, like, does it look good to your eye? Does it look good to the camera? Like, you can manage your color pipeline all day, but if it doesn't look good, it doesn't look good. So we've definitely just had to like judge stuff at the end of the day and get it to a place where it needed so everybody was happy. And it's been fun using it on tours and things like that to like really mess up an image and make it look kind of cool. So that's been really, really fun as well. So here's a little demo video of it. So this is a red clip in Log3G10. And I think this is sped up, of course, but it's about a minute to get something that already looks, you know, pretty passable, I'd say. So I'm gonna go over the features a little bit more. So first one, so this is the new UI built in Rust. So lift, gamma, gain wheels. So here's a little demo of that. You can see we're bringing down our lift on our clip. We're bringing up our gamma and our gain. And lift, gamma, gain, I'm gonna generalize a little bit, but lift is gonna be the lower brightness portions of your image. Gamma is gonna be sort of your middle ground. And then gain is gonna be sort of the highlights and upper end of your image. And then we have an offset over to the right, which is a global offset for all of your brightness or colors linearly. We have a toolbar at the top. So we have a mix percentage, which is if you do a correction, you can mix it on or off. So if you do a correction, you're like, oh, I only want to apply 50% of that correction, or you can just take it down globally. There's something for that. There's also color temperature. So if you want to go up or down by, let's say, 500 Kelvin, something like that, you can just type that in. We have tint, which is your green magenta shift. We have contrast, and then also saturation. And the curves are the one that I have the most fun with. So we have all of the curve permutations that you would want. So hue versus saturation is the one that I use the most. So essentially what you're doing is you select a specific hue, so let's say red, and I will demo video it. So I'm selecting this color red, so you can see it's adjusting the saturation of the red on that rock over there. So this allows you to grab specific colors and either saturate them or desaturate them. But we have other curves like luminance versus saturation. So things that are really bright, you can desaturate or saturate. So you have a lot of control there. And then we also have the ability to select the amount of points along your curve. So you can have more granular control and just select very, very specific colors within your image.
And this UI is actually what led us to do the custom UI development. I'm just going to give a shout out to Florian. The amount of math that's involved to make this spline editor work is staggering, quite honestly. Like, he worked with this for a long time.
Yeah, this was the hardest part, is the spline editor for him, because all of these points, even if they're not being used, have to be exposed to Pixera. So there's just like, I think it's close to 100 points for each one that each get individually driven because you have their X and Y coordinates for each one. It's if you open that shader, like, yeah, you can read it, but it's kind of a mess. All right, so that's a little demo. I'm gonna hand it back to Jay.
So that was a quick demo, but we also have a demo station set up over here if you actually want to dive into how it works. We can right click on the shader and we can show you the actual shader if you want. All right, so the lessons learned. the business case. One of the biggest things is that we were a group of freelancers for a long time. I've worked for a lot of you in this room. And the recontextualization from freelancer to company is a really, really hard transition. Just like going from full-time to freelancer, any of these transitions as people of how people see you are very, very challenging. We also really are very, very heavily into the partnership with Pixera. So this was just an opportunity to just deepen that overall connection. We all got to do it. We got to have marketing. The fact I'm up here talking to you right now, we need to market for the new corporate identity. And this also allows us to improve on the quality of our own projects. It's always, we use this on pretty much everything, sometimes just to give that little last touch of finish to anything that goes to screen. And one of the biggest things is that you have to keep on learning. You have to get better every single day in this industry because there's always somebody who's just as hungry, if not more hungry than you. So being able to have this kind of platform like Pixera where we can work on this stuff outside of our regular day-to-day operations is incredible. So that has provided additional value, not just to our clients, but also for the potential revenue streams for the company. You know, we might not sell it, but we have made some money off of it. And one of the biggest things is that it allows us to prove versus ask. We could go out there all the time and say we are capable of doing these things, but having something that we have carte blanche to present and show with our total ownership over it has been really, really useful for landing projects because there's just something that isn't under NDA, that isn't somebody else's project, that we're kind of sitting midpoint, that we don't want to take full credit for. This is something that we can really use as a way to say, hey, this is something that we did. Florian did, but you know. So these are the additional revenue streams, and you know, I'll go through this very quickly. The first, the clearest one was that this has introduced us to a lot of VP stages and clients. It has opened a lot of doors for us. A nice one that we didn't see coming was actually, it's brought us new avenues into touring. It turns out that iMag and making your iMags look good is a very important thing. I got a call from Connor a few months ago that this was being used on the Adele Munich thing for processing the iMags to make her look even more beautiful than she is. The skills brought a significant amount of integration work to us. Not this in particular, but the idea that we can actually utilize, control, and build out deeper connections into Pixera and extend it into the customized needs for our clients. And it's a differentiation in operational skills. There's a big gap between can you timeline stuff and press play, or can you, when you're faced with a challenge, do some degree of extension of Pixera to reach that challenge. I like this one a lot. There was an opportunity to do more favors. I love doing favors for people. Favors turn into projects eventually, but this industry, I mean, the reason that we're all here is because we do live in very much a favor economy. Everyone uses phone a friend all the time. So to be able to provide something as a free service to the industry that we both love is huge, and we're going to keep on doing it. A fun one has been actually tool development for manufacturers. It turns out if you become known for color, apparently color is very, very hard. So we've had a lot of interest from other manufacturers in strange places that want us to actually look at their color pipeline when specifically talking to creative correction. And again, community involvement, I can harp on it over and over and over again. It really is important. The most important thing is the friends we made along the way. Our network has grown because of this. So we're gonna do, yeah. So further uses for control. These are just some kind of random things that we've done to kind of provide additional value outside of just day-to-day operation to the clients. Most of the stuff we didn't sell as regular orders of business. It's just kind of fun ways that we use control to either land clients or keep clients because it was a differentiating factor.
I can get through this in 5 minutes. So this first one, this is the first time I really dove into control really deep, and this was something I built when I was on a VP set, and I was just bored for a couple of days when they just were like, can you just play that clip looping for a couple hours? And I was like, okay. So ended up just making a interface that did all the things that I wanted it to. So you can select your timeline and your queue and you can play and pause them. I should have sped up this video, but you can see over there it's tracking whether the timeline's playing or not by that color. So you can see if we pause it, it turns yellow. If we play it, it turns green.
And if you have used Control, if you haven't used Control, all of this is built into Pixera's native Control. This is just the web browser. So he was able to do this without, any additional licensing or any additional development.
Yeah. So there's just things that I would have to do all the time that I just wanted easier access to. And yeah, that was just my first, there was a good foray into it. This is a project we did recently that was fun. It was for a basketball event where the entire court was an LED screen, and they had a 3-point contest. So what they wanted us to do was count up each time that a player scored, and at the end show the final score as this animated file. So what we did is every time someone would score, so we do +1, and it had a little animation associated with it, +2, +3. So these are just videos with alpha laid over the top. And you'd see on the right, it's actually calculating what the number is. And then we had a list of 60 different clips, each one with a different number that was assigned to an animation. So then at the end, when they wanted to show the score, we could just click that button and it would find the correct clip and output it to the screen. And you see all the logic for that. It's not that bad. It's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? It's like 6 lines. Like, I'm not a programmer, and it's the ease of use and like the ability to like get into this and make some, pretty fun things. Like when we showed this to the client, they were stoked and they were like, oh, we didn't expect this to be able to happen. That was really, really exciting. And if I can do it, anyone can do it, honestly.
Sam says that a lot. We found that that's not true. We have a folder of all these random things that Sam has built for the next time we work with the client that Sam couldn't be there. Very importantly, because it's 60 video clips that had to be triggered for the accurate count up, if Sam hadn't taught Pixera to count, the previous operators had used a bank of, I think, 4 Stream Deck XLs to run this, and it was a very, very manual process with a lot of scribbling and writing that he was able to bring down into just that small control board.
So that definitely made it easier. This is a fun one that I've been working on for the past couple of days. Is this is a home automation system. So this is an HVAC system. So this has nothing to do with video playback. So we're taking in. This was the document we were given, but it's like these strings of like 15 random numbers with like a checksum verification at the end, and everything has to be converted to hex and then flipped backwards, depending on if you're taking it as an input or an output. But it's all just done in Control. So I just sent that random string, and it reads out the current temperature from the room and then converts that to a Fahrenheit, so you can display it on the UI. But this is just kind of a fun one because it's like, yeah, we're not doing any video playback. It's just kind of cool to see it controlling an HVAC system in like a serial system.
Yeah, it's actually been a very, very good business case for us. I didn't know when we grew up we would just be replacing Crestron and interfacing with it. I don't think that was on anybody's bingo card.
We've communicated with Crestron, but replacing it was that
fun,
was the
though.
next step.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and we have a conclusion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just going to conclude really quickly. In conclusion, we didn't do it with a real plan. We did it knowing we lose money. We knew we'd make new friends through the process and spend time with people we honestly didn't get to see enough sometimes. It's that simple. Everyone involved actually had a lot of fun. This was a really, really, really fun thing to actually undertake because we were learning about something we had no real idea about. Florian made it really easy. Once again, Florian's contact information. If anybody wants to take that, I highly recommend you do. And we're still not going to sell it. We're never going to sell it. It doesn't make any sense. And honestly, we enjoy it for what it is, which is, a really, really nice community project. And so we have some time for Q&A. We're just going to roll this background. Finally, when you just need a break, you just built this for?
Yeah, if you're working on a show and you just get really bored and you just want to play some Pong. This is just running natively in Control, and it's using layers as the ball and the paddles. And yeah, this is a feature that's in another media server, and I figured, if we're gonna do it, let's make it a little bit better. So I'm gonna stop the game really quick, and we'll change our ball size really quick. And then you can regenerate the layers, and it just assigns it to whatever timeline you have it on. So now we have a big old ball. And we're gonna take an 8K notch LC clip and make the ball the clip. And we'll make sure it's playing. Yeah, it's playing, okay. And then we can start playing again.
But Sam, this is in a log format.
Yeah, we can't be having that. This is that original clip that doesn't have any color correction on it. So we're gonna, at some point, come on, there we go. We're gonna grab the Astra Color Toolkit and grade our Pong ball. And that's it. That's the that's the presentation.
When Sam built this, I asked him, why the hell did you do this? And I didn't realize it was for right now, and I'm really happy we found a usage for it.
So we have a few minutes for questions. Oh, wait, we need to wait for the mic. Sorry. We have to capture all comments for posterity. We're going to hold you to it, Emery.
When are you going to be integrating Missile Command?
Ooh, that's a good one. I was thinking Snake next, but I like that.
The bigger question is, who is going to pay for the development so we can put that curtain wipe into Pixera? Because that's the big value add.
I'm curious how many people have been building in control for themselves on projects.
I had a question. There's a couple tools in our industry that were built while you're on set bored, and you don't tell your employers that you're bored, but you're waiting. Like if anyone's ever downloaded LTC files from the website LTC, that was like a Disney programmer who's just like, this is a thing. Is that something, just more for the room, but for you guys, like, are you doing that often? Is that helpful? Like, it's not a lot of industries do that, while they're on the job, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of ideas in the pile. Unfortunately, we've gotten pretty busy. This was undertaken while we were starting the company. It was a little bit slow. I think it's one of the best parts about the industry that we can, it's kind of, it's FUBU, right? It's for us, by us. We can build things like blends, like octopus. Like it really is a crazy thing that we're able to develop these things and just pass out in the industry, not for money, but to make our lives better. Get another hour of sleep, right? For anybody else, I like it a lot. Right, you got OB-Gen over here,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of people in here that have developed stuff just to help other people.
It just takes that time to polish it. Once you have the
If you
the
sell.
beta, yeah, yeah.
Would you have invested more with Florian in hindsight now that you see where this has gone for you?
We're talking about the next level of development. For these kind of passion projects, it was very important that we actually paid him his rate, not just for publicity dollars. So we're looking at the next wave of it. So we're thinking of it as a very kind of stepped thing. Without giving away too much inside baseball, the fact that he built this in Rust means that it's endlessly extensible. And we already have the groundwork for a lot of other tools.
So stay tuned, it sounds like. Anyone else for questions? Otherwise, we'll turn over to the panel. Go ahead. I'm going to give you this mic.
When you were talking about creative uses of color correction, have you ever done anything with like sort of triggered input to the channels, or anything where the color correction is determined dynamically, or by the music or anything like that?
So that's actually one of the fun parts about it, because it is keyframes, right? You could talk directly to the wheels in order to do that. You could build some kind of a control interface that you could talk to from an external controller, which is kind of what we're doing with the tangent panel. But the great thing, and why we chose Pixera to work with on this, is because it's just savable keyframes. We didn't have to build any kind of like a preset recall, because all you're doing is it's saving on timeline, so you can step through all of that pretty dynamically. Then also, like, because it is just a very basic shader, you can stack these. Also, you can just trigger opacities or anything like that. There's a lot of ways you can kind of skin it.
Yeah, to answer your question, there's like, if you wanted to control temperature or something, there's literally in the shader a temperature line, and you could just connect that in control or connect some other outside source to that, and just use that to drive it. Like the UI is just a fancy way to like move around the numbers, which is, yeah.
I guess speaking to that, is there an API or something that can be, not that I don't want to use this beautiful GUI, but I'm curious, the same question is like, is there an easy access to it, like HTTP or some sort of way to ping the shader directly, like for externalizing control?
Through Pixera, yeah.
Just through Pixera?
Just
Yeah,
their
yeah.
API.
Oh, great, okay.
It's reporting all the values for the actual keyframe. So
Sweet.
if you took the time to look through all the shader math and just make your own, it would be fairly easy. Or you could build a control that would, like a control module that would be able to take in whatever values they're sending in and then do some kind of summing for it. Yeah, you don't have to use. I mean, it's way too many values to kind of sit there keyframing through. But yeah, if you want to build your own kind of controller for it, it should be fairly easy.
Yeah.
Is this about Touch Designer?
It can be. I think the question is more of a sort of thought and a question for everyone. But like, where do we draw the line in all of this? Like, there's a weird kind of sort of not belittling, but like, if you're an individual, you're a freelancer. You know, Sam is paid a salary, I guess, and he's able to develop this stuff. But like, how do we draw the line between what our value is as like an engineer or an operator or a coder and developer? Like, you've built this for Pixera, and Connor is going to charge to sell Pixera to use your free tool. There's something that seems, there's very few content creators are going to sit on site and just make free content for a show. But something seems to have gone wrong in our industry, where I think the value hasn't been given correctly to these tools and these things that we're making as freelancers. JT said to me many times that it's really hard to put into workflow. But I think there's it's interesting that going open source is essentially the only way that we can get our software out into the world because it is so niche. But I just think there's an interesting question. Like, if you keep developing this and all of a sudden Florian's costing you 20 grand a month, like at some point are you going to have to think, like, when does it become, it's easy for us to say open source, but something just feels wrong at the moment with our industry because the level of work that we're doing as operators. You know, you might do something magical in disguise, some other disguise op looks over your shoulder, sees what you're doing, and all of a sudden that knowledge has just disappeared into the ether. So like what, I suppose get a question. Is Touch Designer the best media server out?
I mean, this is a very interesting moral, it is actually about the morality of like, what is our work, what is our labor worth? Which we have very conveniently sidestepped by not selling it. That's why we made that choice. It was kind of the brute force decision of, so that we don't have to navigate that. Florian is a freelancer, right? We paid him for his work, but if this thing blows up, if the 100 people that care about color buy it and we sell it for a lot of money, what do we do then? How do we make that right? By not selling it, that's how we got there. But we also built an ecosystem for the company around it. One of the biggest ways is we have gear, right? I think of it like a tip jar. If you like the color toolkit, rent a Pixera 4RS. Conveniently in Long Beach, racked or in cases. I don't know, tour racing.
We don't have the sales pitch ready yet for
that.
that.
Yeah, I didn't prepare that. But that's how we kind of sidestepped that, because we actually have found a soft way to monetize this because of the additional business it's brought, and we keep our business model very simple of like boots on the ground, hours worked, shut the truck, leave, and just cash the check. And we're never going to become incredibly wealthy off of that. We're never going to get the maximum.
We give this guy so much grief for being a marketing.
Can we get the mic so we can capture this, please?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like how we give this guy so much grief for being essentially a sales company and a marketing company. You're not there anymore. So yeah, but it was interesting to your point of like this has essentially become more of a marketing tool, and it's a thought that I've had myself. Like my marketing is shit. I don't have any. It's one Instagram post every 10 months if I'm lucky. But isn't it like that's obviously there's probably an interesting conversation out of all of that of like how do we market ourselves and how do we market our skills and how do we use these tools. That tool's incredible that you've built, and it's been built on a shoestring. And if you started charging for it, most people would just turn around and be like, oh, I'm just going to build that myself over here because ChatGPT. So I think probably actually a really interesting topic of conversation all of this is like how do we as tech people, to answer my own question, how do we market ourselves better to make people know the value that we're bringing by doing this stuff?
We could make Framework a professional guild, perhaps. Anyway, I'm going to move us on with that statement. We have time for a short break. If you want to grab another sandwich or another drink, we're going to run back up with our panel in the next 5 minutes, so be fast. Thanks, guys. That was fantastic. Okay, friends. Okay, friends, we are going to get started again. Come on back. Okay, I can't even remember what I titled this panel at this point. Okay, as everyone's kind of rejoining the group, I'm just going to get started with introductions. I just want to say, generally, this panel is a panel. We're going to talk at you a bit, but it's also a discussion. So, Lucy, hello. Lucy has a mic. If you want to interrupt us or ask a question during the panel, we encourage that. I don't want to isolate us up here and just give you our thoughts. I think this is really important. We all share in this discussion and learn from each other. So don't wait for Q&A. If you want to jump in, unless your name's Scott Miller, you can. Okay. I have an agenda. He does not. So with that, keep in mind, if you are going to heckle us, you need the mic so that we can hold you accountable later. If you are watching the live stream with us, you can find Lucy on our Discord channel and send her questions to ask us. So group participation. All right. This panel, not that one, this one. Right. From renders to code, the business side of asset delivery for generative content. That's a lot of words. Let's do this. That's better. Okay. This panel was born out of a desire to understand our community's relationship to writing our own tools and to make imagery. My career in media servers started 20 plus years ago, and custom content wasn't even a thing, let alone writing code to either run that content or make that content. So, and I'll just point out with that, not only was it usually stock content, I had never seen a work for hire agreement probably until 2011. So contracts and code, that's kind of what we're talking about. What we see now is a demand for the quantities of customized interactive imagery that push many of us into writing our own applications. And I want to pose the question before all of us, are we ready for that as a community? So I've tried to engage a range of people with different experiences related to digital tools, analog tools, making their own stuff. So we can, start this conversation as part of the framework community. So before we introduce ourselves to you, I want you to introduce yourselves to us a little bit, and by a show of hands. I just want to know how many people in this room have created visuals with procedural generation, either through a media server-based content generator or some no or low-code application tool. Probably most of us, right? How many have written their own code to do the same? How many have used AI to help them write that code? Pretty similar range of people. Okay, so with that in mind, how many people in here handle contracts for themselves or their team? And in those work for hire agreements or project engagements, did you have legal counsel help you write those? Did you copy and paste? Do you regularly consult legal advice when you get new contracts to review? Yeah. So one of the things I do want to introduce tonight is understanding how we perceive risk as we embark on these new kinds of work experience. So with that, I'd like to have the panel introduce themselves. These are our friends tonight. I will be kind of driving the bus up here as we navigate this discussion. As everyone introduces themselves, I have the following questions for the group. I want them to just give you their name, their studio name, in the case of our advisor insight, some information about her legal team. What markets their studio work in, and what percentage of the last 2 years was spent in each market, kind of understand the shape of their business, and how much of the video their studios create is rendered file production versus real-time generated. Let's start at the far end.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emery Martin from Electronic Countermeasures. We've been around for about 12 years or so, and we primarily focus on music touring. It's about 50% of our business, give or take. It all ranges from year to year. The other part, 30%, is probably about broadcasts, and then installation, temporary activations, pop-ups, and art and theater make up the rest. And I forget, was there, what else would we have in it? Oh, pre-rendered versus.
Yeah, pre-rendered versus.
We're probably, these days, in the last year, about 80, 90% pre-rendered, which has been a shift back, and the other 10 or 20 real-time.
Great.
Hi all, I'm Rebecca Horton. I probably have the least interesting job up here. I'm a lawyer. I do IP litigation, so I do patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secret. I can't answer any of those other questions that you had. But yeah, no, so my work, I touch a lot of different types of technology, software included. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthew Reagan. I'm from Pseudomagic today, which is very exciting. Our market is let's see here, I guess we're somewhere between any given year, more like 60%, 70% permanent installation, 10 or 20% live event, and then 10% any given year is usually around research, new tools, or some other initiative that a company or university might be engaged in.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny Firpo, CEO and co-founder of All of It Now. Been around for about 10 years. Similar to Emery, I think our breakdown of what industries we're working in varies from year to year, but lately it's been about a 80% mix of live events, real-time, kind of content, and music tours, and then about 20%, let's say 25%, because math is hard, the kind of virtual production, film and TV work as well. And as far as generative content versus rendered content, I would say about 80% of our content or more is probably generative, procedural, real-time in nature, and only about 20% is probably rendered content at this point. And most of that rendered content is generally coming from generative sources from the beginning of either a notch rendered video piece of content or something like an Unreal shader that's being rendered in real time, to disk basically.
I realize I didn't answer that question. So to answer that question, about 80% of what we produce is real-time rendered, and then somewhere between 10 and 20% is pre-rendered content.
Great, thank you. So this first section we're going to start with is about adapting to new workflows. I know we've all been through a very interesting arc over the last 6 years. So I want to take that time slot and take a look back and understand how the changes in real-time content production tools have influenced your team structures, day-to-day workflows, and overall culture of your studios.
So for us, we have a curious sort of position where we started off actually primarily doing a lot of interactive work, and both the founders, myself and my partner Kristen Hovland, come from a programming background. So we were very aware of software development, best practices, all this type of stuff, also dealing with things at scale in animation and film. So we kind of already had that enmeshed within our culture. So we haven't really adapted that necessarily. It's been a lot of it over the time, and it's picked up again, is education of both clients and also our freelancers or our partners that we're working with.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of those same ideas. Like the background that we come from is primarily kind of vested in real-time content generation and kind of driving what we're creating by some user input and some interactive component. So we've been really thinking about what interactive material looks like and what interactive content generation looks like since we started Pseudomagic and kind of well before that. I think similarly, we spend a lot of time having conversations with clients about what that actually means and where the boundaries are about what's both possible, because kind of sometimes what you imagine as interactive is a combination of some interactive element and then some pre-rendered element. So how do we find the kind of mixture of those two pieces that kind of create the illusion and the magic that you see
in events and in spaces. And also around who gets to keep or who owns the things that we create at the end of the day. Because we often draw from an existing set of tools that we've built over our time as a company. And so identifying how much belongs to the company that's hired us by the end is often a conversation that we have to kind of engage in and talk about, so that we're both in kind of agreement about what that looks like.
Yeah, and I would say, from our side, we're very much a small company, boutique company that is inevitably responsive to the needs of our clients, and that clientele changes from month to month, from year to year, and is inevitably responsive to what we need to continue to make money and be a company that exists in 2024 or 2025. And so oftentimes, especially in the live event world and kind of singular event world, is that repeat business and forecastable business is really, really hard. And so the idea of let's try and build a financial forecasting model to say we're going to have this money and can hire this many people is really, really hard to do, especially as a small team, and especially not coming from any form of business background, right? And just kind of doing it because you love it, and then suddenly you start making money from it, and then needing to build a system around that hobby that turns into a job. And so what that means then is that you are in that state, you're always kind of responding to the needs of the client, and then using the best possible tools that you can take to get the job done. And so that can really, really affect what you're using from day to day. And to Matthew's point of like needing to figure out sometimes after the fact of like how to navigate that, of like or to the earlier kind of project conversation of like building a tool on site happens sometimes by necessity, and you kind of realize the value of it until the client wants to suddenly own it or buy it or license it. Can be a really weird conversation to have, especially after you've potentially changed your business model to like more of a time-based approach, which I think a lot of people in the audience and ourselves as well really come from a background in billing for time rather than intellectual property or knowledge, because knowledge is a really hard thing to bill for, or at least value, or assign a monetary value to. So yeah, I think that is a really hard thing to think about, especially after the fact, and kind of really goes to the importance of contracts to create a framework ultimately for like how that intellectual property gets distributed after the fact.
So let me follow that up, because I think what we'd all recognized the last 6 years is having a lot of external volatility in the kind of work being done and where work was available. Would you say then the impact to your team culture was pretty irrelevant? You guys responded to whatever needs were necessary in the work that was available?
For me at least, and our team, I would say absolutely yes. We're very much, the name is an absolute curse of all of it now, because it is ultimately how we respond to most situations. And being kind of responsive is kind of a problem, because you're not able to a lot of time reuse existing tools, because either they don't exist or the projects that you're taking are so unique and bespoke and custom that a lot of the tools that you have built are kind of one-time tools, and you're building this really, really interesting tool box that is instead of like I have a wrench, it's like I have a wrench that only rotates right angles on Wednesdays, and like that doesn't create a lot of reusable scenarios. But like for that one scenario that is really useful, it really can help do a lot of things. So I think like that is the hard part of being responsive, but like inevitably the external volatilities that we're talking about of COVID and writer strike and so many different things that are so outside of your control of forecasting or planning for, or responding to with any sort of level of expertise, because there hasn't been a lot of precedent for the past 6 years, that basically you're really having to be responsive, and that comes ultimately down to staffing and working with people who are not only passionate about the work that they're doing, but also like very generalists and minded in a way that is not so specific that they can solve a problem like 6 different ways, because they're really clever people, and because then the ultimate path becomes more about necessity, or kind of being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time, that ultimately informs your approach.
I would say, like, for us, yeah, the 6 years, yeah, everyone had to flex and, be, very mutable in how we approach things because things change. What we have found, though, because we've always been a little bit of a shape-shifting sort of entity because we have a lot of varied interests and varied background, is we always lean on internally our methods and tactics that we have built up over the years. So even though we may make specific things for projects, how we make them, how we go about producing those things, that doesn't deviate a whole lot. So we can take something that's completely divergent from one project to another project, but still apply the same sort of approach, which is very much a conceptual approach first, and then figuring out technology and aesthetics and that sort of stuff to get to that end goal that we're trying to hit, and apply that. We're not continually remaking the wheel with every project. We're nudging things where it needs to go, but we have a process, and we trust that process.
Yeah, I would echo that. I feel like organizationally, we really rely on the methodology that we use for approaching projects and work and what that might look like, and the tools that we end up using to get there along the way, whether it's some web framework or a touch designer or a media server. Those are often very different, and it's been everything from pieces of gaff tape and a little bit of glue and a hope and a prayer to very sophisticated pieces of equipment. So I think in a lot of cases we're always trying to find the right tool for the particular endeavor that we're engaged in, but trying to maintain the consistency of what we imagine is a reliable approach and kind of methodology for how we're approaching the work. Because I think that keeps us grounded as individuals. We hope that it does.
So, but if you have a studio to keep grounded and keep fed. So thinking ahead 3-6 years out with that kind of mindset in the team, does that mean you'll just see what comes your way, or are you anticipating certain changes that you're trying to prepare for internally before you get hit?
I think rock, paper, scissors?
No, go for it, go for it.
One of the things that we've done is that we have seen over the past 4 years, we've built some variation of the same kind of like classification of tool, probably 6 different ways. And so one piece that we're trying to think about is how do we templatize that enough that if we need to shape it for a particular job, we can certainly do that, but we don't have to kind of reinvent or rebuild the whole framework from the bottom up every time. And I think that's often really important to us is we'd rather spend and invest the time that we have now in kind of laying a really solid architectural framework that we can tailor for a particular job, as opposed to trying to think about how we're going to solve that problem yet again when it kind of arises. So I think to your question, like we're trying to think about what are the things that we see consistently enough that we can anticipate there'll probably be some shape of that in the future. So how can we kind of get ahead of what that might look like?
I think for us, we're trying to be very considered about where our interests lie and what type of projects and what type of work we want to make and want to put out into the world. And so we're actively looking at what the horizon could look like and trying to put a certain amount of resources towards going after those things actively, rather than completely passively just getting, falling under the treads that are continually moving, in the wheel of, the way this industry can be at times. It's hard. We're not always successful at that, but that's the attempt.
Yeah, I think like the perils of investing too hard in specific tools are that the wheels of progress in technology at this point move at such a pace that sometimes the development cycle of building a tool can be longer than it takes for that tool to then become invalidated, and I think or for the absolute monolith companies like the Epics and Disguises and Pixeras of the world to come out with a tool that's ultimately better because they have a lot more minds working on that kind of thing. And I would say that for us, at least, our best tools come from excruciatingly painful moments in a project to say, this was awful, or this workflow, this effort, this little piece of the puzzle was so excruciatingly painful to work through that we never want to ever have to do that again. And that our best tools are usually coming from sources of great pain, which, welcome to live events, but like,
lessons learned.
Yeah, exactly. That ultimately learning the hard way, I think, is sometimes where partially why they're learned so well is because it's seared into your memory in a way of we never want to get to that point again in a project, and those tools have become super useful because it solves a problem that we see one time and then potentially never want to see again, and is built, most importantly, and informed by a need for flexibility in that, in mitigating that pain. So being able to say time code is oftentimes a really horrible thing to deal with after the fact, right? And so dealing with a time code tools that ultimately does certain steps for you, some really monotonous things for you, like counting individual frames or subtracting individual frames, is something that is coming from somebody having to do that one day and never wanting to do that again. And basically those tools are really, really specific, but potentially save hours and hours and hours of time, especially manual, monotonous, tedious time that nobody wants to do. And for us, at least, those different little tools that don't add up to much on paper, just save human time and create a library of tools that we like to use because not only do we make them and we're proud of them, but also that it makes us proud to save each other from having to experience that pain again.
And here's Scott.
Question number one.
We didn't use Touch Designer for those tools.
I have a thought. I'll try to get into a question.
It's more of a comment.
What, I suppose, what's the business models here? Because it's quite interesting that we had a talk where we give everything away for free, and now we're having to talk about how we charge for everything. If you guys what's the business models here? Because we've kind of spoken like a bunch of tech startups for the last hour, yet I don't see any Ferraris outside. And I don't see where have we gone wrong in our industry where we have so much ability and knowledge and are doing so many incredible things, but with your guys' business models, if you could touch in the brief, what's the driver in all of this? Would you do better as a freelancer, or are we building these little small entities of 2 or 3 people and still just struggling to earn the same money that you could earn as a freelancer? Something seems to have gone wrong. Why are we not breaking through?
I just want to point out the next section of questions is called redefining business models.
Right, cool. I'll just shut up.
I do want to.
But it would be interesting to hear your guys' business models and your view. And so I've forgotten your name.
Emery.
No, sorry, lawyer.
Rebecca.
I apologize. You took the names off the board. Rebecca, it'd be interesting to hear from Rebecca, hearing these guys chat and hearing their business models, and from your interactions with other more traditional tech companies, where what the thoughts are, where our business is, and why potentially, what's stopping our value being more realized over and above, I'm going to work for a day and you're going to pay me X amount of money, which is a question on Laura's list.
I think one thing we haven't really talked about is your actual thrust of your question is the business models. I mean, we've talked about what we do, but
right.
I mean, us for one thing, we're creatives and artists at the end of the day. No, I'm talking about my company. No. We're artists and creatives at my company at the end of the day, and we've been profitable. The only unprofitable year we ever had was 2020. So I take a little bit of. I think we're projecting a little bit upon the panel up here and maybe the rest of the room. And maybe we should listen a bit about what we're actually all doing here.
I think I have some questions that'll help Rebecca participate coming up because
Learned a lot.
because I think to your point, like our value, our worth in what we contribute, so much of us operate on this labor of love that we end up devaluing our work. Digital labor in general gets devalued, right? Because it's hard to differentiate our work from what the computer's doing for people who don't understand the way that we are using those tools. So what I think I wanted to get into with the team is talk about, when I put these notes together about redefining our business models, I think we're talking to a group of people who have been using software and solving problems with code for a long time at this point. So there's not really a cultural shift that I perceive as a pressure on us to all make this shift. They're well versed in this shift already. So I don't know that you guys really have redefined your business models, or if you project, and this is where I think we're going to get into contract questions, you're talking about pain points, some very hard-earned solutions that you would like to protect. And I think, Scott, to your point, that is where, like, we've done really hard work and now we would like to protect those mental investments. Monetize them or not, we want to be able to appropriately earn for our labor. So maybe we should shift.
Sorry for doing that.
No, you probably helped me skip a whole section, honestly. Let's talk about, I think, what you have learned from going through those processes, building tools, doing very hard work and maybe not being appropriately compensated for them, and how you're protecting those tools you're building for the future in the way you interact with your clients and your contracting.
I'll go last.
I mean, at the onset, we always valued our work, and as educators too, because we taught many students and many years worth of students, we try to instill with them too that what they make is worth something, and never to give it away for anything less than what it's worth, and to appropriately value it and look around and talk to everybody to see what people think it's worth, and it's probably worth more than that. And so we had to turn down a lot of work because we do not give it away for free. If we have to think about something, that costs money, because it's relying on our expertise that we have gained over a very long period of time. And to have us put that to use for whatever your cause is, whatever your show is, whatever your project is, I could be putting that elsewhere. And so that valuation is always continually being reassessed, but we're never give anything away for free in that way.
Yeah, I think, like, to Scott's earlier point, about potentially devaluing our work, I think that is part of the mistakes I think that we've made in the past, is sometimes in not addressing the fact that we made a tool in our contract language, and effectively having to hide the fact that we made a tool from the client, which then devalues our own work because it feels then more mechanical and less thoughtful of, no, we're actually programmers or artists and engineers at the same time, and rolled into one brain or one company of brains. And that if you're able to be more thoughtful in the way that you word your contracts, it can add value, or at least perceived value, on the part of the client of, we're not just hiring a person to push a button or to type on a keyboard, we're hiring somebody to solve a problem. And if they develop something in the course of solving that problem, it's theirs and not ours. It creates this uncomfortable relationship and dynamic between client and company, because either you're then withholding information from the client to prevent overreach, or you're trying to anticipate the need to protect technology or a tool that may exist in the future but doesn't exist yet. And that's a really hard contract to create because you're like, there may be a ton of value in what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 years. We don't know though. And how do you attribute value to that in legal language is really, really hard. And for many people who are running 5-person, 3-person, 10-person companies, trying to craft a contract with a client who expects that level of overreach to happen on their part is really hard to fight against because you're potentially a single person, a sole proprietor, a contractor, a freelancer, whatever, fighting against potentially a legal army of people who do that for a living. And that is, I think, the really hard situation because not only then are you saying, well, it's a David versus Goliath situation, legally, but then also you're a contractor, you're a freelancer, you're a small team that can't afford to turn down some of that work, and you kind of just get steamrolled by a 400-person legal team that's just like, sign the contract or we don't give you the check. And it's a really hard relationship to balance we want to protect our rights and our ability to use these tools in the future against we want to continue to be a business. And so I think that's a really hard dynamic, and I think this is all coming from more of a very singular experience of running a small boutique agency as well, and having to balance that like professional compromise against financial necessity.
I think it's interesting to hear other positions on the panel. Like one of the pieces that we often think about, and this maybe goes to your question about business model, Scott, is that we sometimes, or we frequently kind of begin our engagements trying to understand what the precise need is, because it's very likely that you don't actually need our whole team. You actually just want one of us as a developer to report to a project manager and like, I'm a day rate and great, I will do as much as I can or nothing at all if you don't tell me what to do in that time. And so, sometimes our engagements are really around an individual and that individual's expertise that's expressed as time as an engagement. And sometimes we take a much more holistic kind of approach where we're more invested in understanding the problem that you're trying to solve and trying to see the much broader picture that you're trying to approach, so that we engage with you in a kind of dialogue around what are the right tools to use, what's the right way to approach this creatively, how can we kind of achieve the particular creative or technological end that you're after. And so for us, we usually kind of front load some of those interactions with trying to understand what it is a client is actually trying to get from us first, before we kind of impose an idea about like, you have to hire all 3 of us or you have to hire 2 of us. Like, we've been everything from a one-stop shop to, a hired gun. So it really depends, I think, for us. And I think this goes to your kind of question about lessons learned, is that we want to know kind of from the beginning, what is it that you need from us at the end of the day, so we can find the right way to engage with you, both contractually and creatively.
Scott.
I forgot to do the disclaimer. These are all my personal views, not the firm. Your point about being front-loading it is really important, and then I would take it even one step further on the front end, and that's important, like thinking through like what's actually important to your company, right? And what's actually sort of what's of value and what's not, right? And I think the nature of an agreement, if it's just something where you're a hired gun, right, and it's discrete, that's going to be a very sort of different type of project, and you're going to look at it differently than if it's something that you're actually creating something, right? And to your point, right, I think the problem sometimes is like if you get to the point where you're actually like negotiating it and you're sort of under the gun, right, and you want that project and you're interested in it and everything like that, and then you feel pressure, you learn from that, right? And so then the next time you go in and you sort of, it's not a plug for my profession, but you have provisions, right, that sort of address that, right? I think it's important to sit down and actually think about what's really important to you. Is it making money? Is it attribution, right? Is it exclusivity? What terms of that? Maybe it's all of them, and then sort of develop provisions that sort of apply for that, so then you're ready when you're going into like the next agreement. And there's going to be different types of agreements, right? But you're ready for it, so then when you're having those negotiations, right, you have something there, and then if changes are being made to it, you know that it's implicating something that's important to you. And I think it helps to sort of have a more honest discussion. But I do think also that, you know, understanding sort of the nature of the project also helps to, like, you have things that are important to you, they might have some things that are important to them, right? And it doesn't mean necessarily if you're sort of at odds on those, there's not some way to sort of, I think, meet in the middle. And I think that's where sort of the open discussion comes from, right? Is understanding that if it is exclusivity, is it really truly like an entire umbrella exclusivity? Like, you can't work on any sort of similar project, or you can't use that, you know, that code or those tools or anything like that ever? Or is it because they're worried about it in a certain market or in a certain geography or for a certain time period, right? So I think, you know, if you have these sort of more open discussions on the front end, it allows you to sort of vet and ask those questions to then sort of help tailor, I think, the agreements. But ultimately, I mean, I think it's what's really important to you, because if it's not monetizing it right, like if it's, you just want to have this and then you be able to market it subsequently, which I think we heard from the Astra folks, like that's definitely one, you know, you're going to just approach it differently, right, in that scenario. So I think it's really important, and I think something I've heard across the board is that kind of sitting down and thinking through sort of your fundamental sort of business mission. Like what's the purpose of your business, right? Your business model, right? Like how are you making money? How are you sustain? Like I think that those sort of, it takes a little time and it's more work on the front end, but I think subsequently it saves you then from getting into situations where ultimately you have to hide things from your client.
It saves you from having difficult discussions after things have already like left the barn, sort of thing. You know, the setting of expectations, I think, is one of the big things I'm hearing, and like that's one of the very key things. It's like, what is this about? What are we actually doing here? And let's agree to that first before we actually do anything. And it makes sense too that we do something.
I think it's also like one of my favorite things to do in any contract negotiation is just to play dumb and be like, what exactly do you mean about like worldwide exclusive rights until the sun explodes? Like, until it actually explodes? Until like, we feel like it explodes? Like, do you know what that means? Because in my experience so far, it's not unlikely that the person that you're interacting with probably has to go back to someone in their legal department and say, like, what do we actually mean by this? So there's often some space to make sure that you actually are kind of aligned on what you're agreeing to. And Rebecca, to your point, like there's probably a lot of space to kind of like, you know, help the sand settle so that both parties are happy at the end of the day.
I think one way too, also looking at it too, is not only so you go into it, right? Because actually I think by nature of the, it takes work to get there, right? But then to have the contract, it's almost like effectively like a guide, right? Like this is what everyone kind of is on sort of the same page. I mean, to the extent you can, but I actually think that there's some benefit when you have those sort of those pressure points when you're negotiating, right? Because you're negotiating, you haven't entered into the agreement. So then there's also like not breach or sort of all the consequences that come from it, right? So if there's a pressure point, it probably would have become an issue once you're entered into the agreement, right? So it's actually almost better to have those pressure points in the negotiation stage, right? And then also to sort of prevent even having those pressure points, right? Having those provisions then going forward almost helps you sort of get to a better place in the agreement. So then everyone is sort of more aligned, I guess. There's a little fewer surprises necessarily down the road. But if you're wondering about it, if you're thinking about it, if you're worried about it, that's maybe something you should think about, sort of having it into the agreement itself, then hoping and like crossing your fingers that it's not going to become an issue down the road.
I would say just to dovetail off that, the one like other big lesson learned I feel like we've taken away is that often when you're in the kind of early conversations about like, oh, what are we going to build? It's going to be so cool. It's going to be this great thing. And like, oh, how long is it going to take? We try to stay away from saying like, oh, it'll be done on November 2nd. Instead, it's we're going to be done 4 weeks after we sign a contract, right? Because I don't want to give the impression that just because we're burning time kind of coming to an agreement that we've been working during that. Like we're going to start working once everybody's happy. We shake hands and like it's great. And so that's one thing that we try to at least think about when we're like having those conversations, is trying to set the expectation that we have to arrive at our agreement together before we're going to begin working.
Yeah, we have some questions down here. Come down
In regards to that, actually, like I was thinking about the client agreement document almost as a roadmap for how the engagement is going to feel. Oftentimes, it feels like when you're working with a really big company, they have that, and we're like, okay, let's like gotta turn left here, and I gotta turn right here, and I gotta bend in this way and bend in this way. But oftentimes, and obviously, there's the David versus Goliath analogy you gave, which is very accurate in regards to scale. I feel like it's so important in the beginning to iron that out and just say like, hey, we're gonna work with you, here's how it's gonna be. You're gonna work with us, here's how it's gonna be. And creating that like mutual respect through a document beforehand or just through a conversation beforehand. I feel like in that you can only really find that out through trial and error in some ways, but also I think that it's important that like we cumulatively discuss with each other about like, hey, you should consider adding this. This has been beneficial to us. And it becomes a point of talking that we kind of all avoid. Similar to like day rates, nobody wants to talk about it, it's awkward, but like, how is there a going day rate if all the people are just secretly agreeing to it but not talking about it? Like, there's all these unspoken kind of taboo things, and I do think that contracts are kind of one of them. Obviously, we don't also want to just like get a contract from like a competitor and then copy and paste it. That's a terrible idea. So in regards to like your trial and error, in regards to like working through just saying, hey, here's our roadmap, here's how we engage with clients. Are there specific things that you guys have learned from peers that you've integrated into your own? Is it mainly through your own personal experience? And then the third part to that is, did you just consult legal counsel and just find, hey, this is how they say to do it. We just trust that. We always add that in as a backup, essentially.
Yeah, I would say definitely start with legal counsel. Build a general agreement that is going to make sense for mostly for you. And then if you're working with a larger client, chances are it's going to get sliced to ribbons anyway. Like you're going to get steamrolled by, this is our boilerplate language. You may be able to modify a couple of words, but the other problem that you deal with, especially in time-based events where there is a physical deadline that cannot be pushed, like the event is going to be on November 2nd, and if you want to burn 3 months in legal negotiations, like you've sliced off your nose to spite your face because now you have 3 months less to do the same amount of work. So like that is a realistic problem in live events specifically. In more code-based things where you can push the deadline, yeah, spend the time to negotiate that. But I think the most important thing that I think we've learned is, that ultimately, live events are very special in that they exist for a very particular moment in time. And not only is that special to the audiences, but that's also special from a marketing perspective. And from our, experiences, the most painful lesson that we've had to learn is to talk about marketing before the project is even done, because there are two reasons, right? For the purpose of negotiation, you're not allowed to talk about this project. It gives you leverage because now you are effectively being white labeled. You're not allowed to talk about the project, which means that your work has value. And most importantly, the credit of the work has value to the client, that they are essentially preventing you from being able to take credit for the work, meaning that they want to take credit for the work. And, like, not saying it adds a zero to the value of your work, because that's obviously a blanket statement that can't be quoted, but like it adds a significant amount of value, or at least it should, in your negotiations for saying, if you want to white label and we are not allowed to take credit for the work, that has a cost, because there is a marketing value to every project that we do. And even if it's like, you can take credit for it 6 months after the project is done, is oftentimes like a compromise that isn't actually a really good compromise, because the lifetime of that event, the marketing value of that event might be dead by that point. So I think that from our experience, the most important part of the project beyond getting paid for it and doing the work is getting credit for the work. Because if you can't, that is a significant element of your portfolio, a significant way to generate future business. And unless the value of that client is so high that it's worth gagging yourself over the ability to take credit for that work, then you really have to, have that conversation with the client ahead of time. And, I will say that like a contract is obviously an important roadmap and framework, but ultimately the conversation with the client is the most important part. And having a conversation with the client often, prevents you from having to really like consult the contract more than that initial signing, because you have a mutual understanding. and that the contract is really a defense mechanism a lot of the time rather than a roadmap in that case, because inevitably the conversation with those clients will be way more in-depth and meaningful than the legal language used to define that relationship.
And I think also that it causes a resume gap that is massive, and that is its own marketing, budget, essentially, to budget in. But none of us want to have, some of the best projects we've ever done in our lives, and then 3 years of blank resume work. It's an awful experience. So
absolutely,
it's untenable.
Absolutely, yeah. Because then also, ironically, you become a word of mouth only, connection point, and then you have zero marketing ability. Where like, oh, what have you been doing this time? It's like, I don't want to be known for how good I am at being white labeled.
Yeah,
that's a terrible experience.
No.
So,
white label is a very expensive proposition, I would say. Along with, if you want to own the tools or the things that don't get used in the final product, that's also a much higher cost as well, because that's how we make things. And if we give you how we make things, you potentially reverse engineer that. Then, get used in perpetuity. And one or all over there. We have no way of knowing. And so there's high costs for that, and most people don't want to pay those costs, and that's fine. And that means when that gets rolled out very quickly in negotiation, it also reveals a bit of the client. It's a bit of the vetting of a client in a way where, whether it's going to be a good working relationship, it can tell you a lot, that process.
I think also, though, when you're like with these things that are important to you, like is it attribution, right? Like in advance of the project, like you can market it, right? Or like, are you okay having maybe not marketing for a couple weeks after or something like that? Like I think in those discussions that you're having about sort of, first of all, just figuring out what is important to you, right? Like it might be for a particular project or more broadly, just like for the business model, like what are key provisions, right? I think in those discussions, once again, not a plug for my career, but like in those discussions, like I think it's also, you can talk to council about just like, how do we go about this? Or we see like these sort of like, these form contracts coming to us and they're demanding, and these are sort of the terms, like what are the parts where, like how do we sort of go back and forth on this? Like give us help, like give us strategy, right? Because it might not be possible for you to bring in counsel for every, and they might have an army of counsel on the other side, right? So I think you can ask for those sort of tools and sort of ways to kind of, because you're going to start, right? You're going to start far away, right? And then you might sort of be able to whittle it down to like what's truly important to both sides. So I think you can also talk when you're sort of at that process of sort of updating the form contracts and whatnot, or figuring out sort of what's important to you. I think you can also have a discussion of like, okay, so where can we give, this is what we see coming in, how do we sort of come back to that so we can still, and it's more efficient, right? And so maybe you're not losing as much time to kind of just get to the point where you're actually, enter into the agreement.
The other thing is not necessarily like trying to figure these things out once projects have started, is pushing that forward. They may come back to their own service agreement or their own like standard contract, but if you get yours out there first, that forces them to at least respond and to force that negotiation to begin, because sometimes people don't want to engage with it up front and they want to start projects, and it's like, no, we really got to do this.
I want to ask Rebecca one question as we're trying to wrap up, and then we'll open the room for some more questions before we enjoy the rest of our evening. I'm just curious if there are trends in what ends up in court for IP litigation that might serve as like a light bulb moment for what we should be looking for in our contracts, if there's an arc or just a trend in general to what IP litigation looks like.
I think, right, not so much on this, like, obviously AI is huge right now, right? And there's a lot of lawsuits currently about sort of what's being used to train the models and everything like that, and if the output's copyright infringement or if it's some sort of violation of the DMCA or breach of contract, right? And so I think, and actually what you're kind of seeing in some of these cases is a lot of those claims, because the protectability of code, if you use AI to generate it, is currently the Copyright Office is saying no go. It doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case, but that's kind of currently where it is. And so, I think when it's interesting sort of seeing some of these, so I'd say there's trends of like the AI litigation currently going on, and there's stuff even as it relates to like using training a model based off of open source code and sort of the claims associated with that, and ultimately, currently, at least what's currently still at issue in that case is a breach of contract case, right? Like, did they breach the licenses that the owners, sort of entered into, and anyone that uses that platform has to agree to in order to sort of use that open source code. So there's that piece, but I think, honestly, I think with software contracts, software's been sort of a thing for a long time, and so as a result, like breach of contract as it relates to a software agreement is pretty, has been pretty prevalent, is still pretty prevalent, and so I think the thing there oftentimes is what brings the parties in is the ambiguity, right? Like you're quibbling over sort of if something could be interpreted in a certain way. So once again, right, if you get the opportunity to sort of flesh that out at the beginning and it's sort of in the contract and the contract is then a guide, right, it leaves less room for that ambiguity. And then also I think that there's, because I know that the interest is also not to get to the point where you need someone like me, and because that means you're in court. I think, with that too, I think that there's certain, and things that we talked about, that there's certain things that you can also put into the agreement, not only for like what's important to you, so make sure it's there and you have the guide, but also like if there's some sort of belief on either side that someone's not performing under the agreement, right? Like there are provisions that you can add in, like providing the other party notice that you think that they're not complying with the agreement, providing them an opportunity to cure, so like a certain period of time to fix whatever's the problem, or sort of maybe payments decrease or something like that. Or so I think that there's sort of lots of ways that you can kind of go about not only thinking about what's important to you to ensure that it's in there, but also if things go awry, sort of the process in which the parties will go about sort of trying to resolve that before you actually get to the point which no one wants to get to, which is litigation. So yeah.
Curious, if I may, what on the other side, outside of software, on image generation and that type of thing as well?
What are we seeing?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's, I mean, other than like if you're using, like the training sets and whatnot, I mean, I think once again, that's still like, there's a bunch of sort of AI cases that are all sort of text to image and like scraping in terms of the code and whatnot. So all those cases are currently pending. They're going to make their way up. But no, I don't know if I've necessarily seen anything different happen in that sense, other than it's just easier to like, right? Because the images are everywhere, so it's easier to copy, and I think it's easier for people to accidentally do it and not know they're doing it. So you see a lot of, and now there's sort of.
I'm wondering about the provisions of like people who are generating images. Be like, hey, you can't turn around and use this after the fact.
Yeah.
Delivered and stuff.
I mean, I think you can definitely, you have that in terms of like the scope of the use, and I think then you put it into the agreement, right? Like what it can be used for, how it can be used, how long it can be used for. So if that's something that's important, right, then you're going to put it in. Yeah.
Let's get to some questions.
Hello. So this is kind of tailing off of that conversation. The line between tool and craftsman has been blurred more and more. It used to be woodworker uses lathe to make vase or cup or whatever, and it's pretty obvious that that's the thing they've made. But now we have, we just talked about Astra, which is using Rust, which is an open source software, and Pixera, and they've made this thing that's kind of somewhere in the middle. What are some things that, talking about like, it's not even really David versus Goliath, it's David versus Goliath and Goliath and Goliath and Goliath, right? It's these electronic countermeasures and pseudo magic and all of it now versus, Epic, Pixera, Disguise, all the touch designer, all these big people that are making tools that you can then make things from. What can these smaller boutiques, what can we as, makers of content, makers of things do to protect the things we make within these tools, right? How can we protect the specific thing that we've made when often it is these small boutique companies doing it? I'd love to hear, Rebecca, your thoughts on that and the teams as well.
How do you protect the specific thing that you made?
When it's so...
There's a lot of parties involved?
Yeah, when it's so kind of amorphous as to where did the generation of that thing begin and where did it end? Because there's so many of these tools that go into making the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think with, you know, you can see in some agreements, right, it's you own anything that you had before you entered into the agreement. And so that's something that you see sometimes. There's always like a provision about like who the respective IP rights and what is yours and what is theirs, and the license to sort of use it. So I think, you know, I think on that end is if you have tools already that you're using to then generate sort of the whatever the work is that you're entering into the agreement for, right? And you want to protect those tools, you're going to put that in, right? You're going to indicate that, you know, any sort of IP that you have before you enter it into the agreement still maintains as your own. I think in terms of like where it goes after you, like the work after that, I mean, I think that depends on who's owning that. Like, is it a work for hire? You know, what is the agreement, right? And where is it sort of being then going after that fact? I mean, I think that those are things that you should probably understand. You'd probably want to understand. And if it goes in a direction you don't want it to go, right, then sometimes that might end up with a person like me. But yeah, so I think at least for the part of the equation in which, you know, you're coming into it and you already have IP and you're going to be kind of using that, then.
So I guess the question is, what if you don't own that IP? What if that IP is someone else's IP that you have, that's a playground for you to make a thing within?
So like making an image out of Photoshop.
Making an image in Photoshop, making a program in something like Rust, which is an open source coding language, right? The IP is not necessarily yours, but it's a tool, in my opinion, like a lathe or like a drill or like a saw, you know, where you're using tools to create content, create images, create videos. But that IP is not necessarily ours. And right now the model is we are licensing their IP to create our product or our thing. But that line is becoming, I mean, right now with AI especially, it's becoming very, very blurred.
Sure.
And where is that going, especially because in the United States, IP and copyright laws has not caught up with technology in the way I think we all wish it would.
Sure.
So yeah, just that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to lead that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to look at those. I mean, it depends on what you're using, but you want to look at those, like you talked about, there's licenses. Like you want to look at those, and I know it's you kind of want to do the work first, and then, you know, you're eager to kind of jump in, right? But you do want to understand if you have those tools that you're using. You do want to understand sort of if there are licenses associated with it. You want to understand the scope of those licenses. The same thing if you're using open source code. Like you want to understand the extent of those licenses in which you're agreeing to. I think then, you know, there's in copyright, like there's sort of this, and I think you probably have sort of, I think it's sort of being talked about a lot more, but there's a doctrine called fair use. So it's like you're only using enough that's like absolutely necessary, and then the resulting work is sort of transformative. And so I think that there's sort of, that's sort of the gray area, right? And you don't have any sort of certainty there unless you had to actually sort of vet it out in court. But I do think that one way to sort of go, to give you maybe a little bit more certainty there is to, obviously, if you're using certain tools and there's licenses associated there, sort of look at that, right? Because it might be spelled out, right? And it might not be something of concern. Or if it is, right, then you have to kind of think about the way you're using it. But currently, right now, I think if you, like currently sort of how the Copyright Office is sitting with like the use of, for example, like using AI to, you know, generate code and whatnot. Like you have to disclose that when you're seeking a copyright to the Copyright Office. And then, you know, I think just something else I would sort of say about that, and I thought through, is that if you are sort of using AI or, you know, or open source, like, sort of one of the mechanisms that you can kind of use internally to sort of understand the scope of that is you document it, right? Like you keep track of sort of the way it's being used, because then also that is something actually you have to, either in agreements you have to indicate how much you're using in terms of open source or whatnot, but like if you seek a copyright, you're gonna have to disclose to the Copyright Office, like the scope of your use of AI, and then you're gonna actually, and they want you to log it, right? So you don't wanna reach that point and then all of a sudden say, shoot, right? Like what was it? So that would just probably be, I can't give you sort of a clear cut, like, it's yours or it's not yours. But I would say in terms of look at those licenses, and then also sort of if you are sort of using those tools or open source or AI, make sure you're documenting it so you're able to sort of recognize it. So you're also not, when you're contracting around it, right, you are able to answer those questions if you need to.
It's making me think a lot about like, there are different types of open source licenses and being aware of those, and same thing with like Creative Commons and that type of thing, and they have very specific sort of like, this can be used without attribution, with attribution, or very explicit. And so it's like definitely looking at that sort of thing, especially if you're utilizing things that are built upon this sort of stuff. When you get into manufacturers, that's a different story because you might be making something, but it doesn't necessarily rely on their code necessarily. It may touch it, it may like interact with it, but it's not necessarily has anything to do with them. But like back to the attribution sort of thing of like, and the logging sort of thing is, so one thing that just came up recently is, so Steam, the company that distributes games and all that stuff with Valve, now if you're going to build a game and it uses any AI sort of generated assets, you have to disclose that because they're trying to head off from ending up in ambiguity and then themselves getting sued for the thing that they are distributing that you're putting out there.
That's kind of where
it's a hedge.
Yeah, that's kind of where the tools that this community makes is kind of I feel like we're headed towards that.
We have to be mindful of it. Yeah.
So it's just that's why I want to have the conversation.
We can definitely go really deep. I want to give us some time to enjoy the rest of the evening that we have here together. So we can keep these conversations going, but I personally would like to do it with an adult beverage because we're getting in the weeds. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel. And please enjoy the rest of the evening. We've got plenty of food, and I assume there's more drink out there. Thanks.